Hi, good day. Welcome back to our class. Today, I am going to make a pre-lab lecture and a demonstration on the activity acids and bases. What I would like you to do is to observe carefully and be attentive. The first part of the activity is we are going to taste the acids and the bases and test them using the indicators, the blue and the red litmus paper, the methyl orange, and the phenolphthalein. So I'm going to fill these test tubes with the acids and the bases. Then to each test tube, we are going to add 5 ml of water. With the use of the glass tubing, we're going to taste its acid and base. So let's do it this way. When you taste it, you're going to place it at the tip of your tongue. Likewise, we're going also to taste the second acid, which is acetic acid. How does it taste? Then we are going to taste also the sodium hydroxide as well as the ammonium hydroxide. Now, after tasting the acids and the bases, so we are going to test them using the indicators. With the use of the hydrochloric acid, these 4 test tubes contains the hydrochloric acid. So the first test tube, we are going to put the blue litmus paper. Then observe what happens. To the second test tube, let us put the red litmus paper. See what happens. If you are going to compare the two, what have you observed? To the third test tube, we are going to add the methyl orange. What have you observed? And to the fourth test tube, we are going to add the phenolphthalein. What have you observed? To the second test tube, this contains the acetic acid. So we are going to test this again with the same indicators, the blue and the red litmus paper, the methyl orange, and the phenolphthalein. So we will divide again this into 4 parts. Again, to the first test tube of the acetic acid, we're going to put the blue litmus paper. Observe what happens. To the second test tube containing the acetic acid, we're going to put the red litmus paper. Observe what happens. If you're going to compare the two, you try to observe them. Then, to the third test tube containing the acetic acid, we're going to add the methyl orange. Observe what happens. To the fourth test tube containing the acetic acid, let's add the phenolphthalein. Observe what happens. Let's go to the third test tube containing the sodium hydroxide. Now, let's divide again this content into 4 parts. To the first test tube of the sodium hydroxide, let us put the blue litmus paper. Observe what happens. To the second test tube containing the sodium hydroxide, let us put the red litmus paper. Observe what happens. To the third test tube containing the sodium hydroxide, we're going to put the methyl orange. And to the fourth test tube containing the sodium hydroxide, let's put the phenolphthalein. To the fourth test tube, this contains the ammonium hydroxide. And we are going to divide this again into 4 equal parts in order to be tested with the indicators. To this first portion of the ammonium hydroxide, we are going to put the blue litmus paper. Observe what happens. To the second portion of the ammonium hydroxide, let us put the red litmus paper. Then, to this third portion, let us put the methyl orange. Observe what happens. To the fourth test tube containing the ammonium hydroxide, let us add the phenolphthalein. Observe what happens. Then you are asked to answer the table provided in the lab guide. You are going to describe the taste. We know that the acid tastes sour, while the bases stays bitter. For the reaction towards the litmus paper, I have shown you what had happened to the color of the blue litmus paper in the presence of the acid, and what had happened to the red litmus paper in the presence of the base. And you also have to fill up that space there in the table, your observation on what had happened to the acids when added with the methyl orange, and what had happened to the bases when added with the methyl orange, and what had happened to the acids when added with the phenolphthalein, and the bases when added with the phenolphthalein. So kindly make the observations by writing your observations onto the table provided in the lab guide. For the next part of the activity, we are going to make a comparison on the rate of reaction between the hydrochloric acid and the acetic acid with the aluminum shavings. So let's get some amount of the hydrochloric acid. And we will also get some amounts of the acetic acid. Then to these two acids, we are going to add the aluminum shaving. To these two acids, we are going to add the aluminum shavings. Compare which of the two exhibited a rapid reaction. Makita eh? Sige na? This is the reaction between the hydrochloric acid and the aluminum shavings. And this is the reaction between the acetic acid and the aluminum shavings. You try to compare. The next part of this activity is we're going to react the ferric chloride with sodium hydroxide and the chromic sulfate with sodium hydroxide. So let's get some amount of the ferric chloride. This is the ferric chloride. This is the chromic sulfate. I want you to take note of the original colors before they will undergo a chemical reaction.
Okay.
To ferric chloride, we are going to add the sodium hydroxide. The sodium hydroxide that we're going to add first is having a concentration of 3 normal. Observe what happens. So, observe what happens to the color of the ferric chloride after adding the 3 normal sodium hydroxide.
Ganun na.
With the chromic sulfate, kindly take note of its color and observe what happens when I'm going to add this with 3 normal sodium hydroxide. With the precipitate that we have produced between the ferric chloride and the sodium hydroxide, let us react this precipitate with a higher concentration of the sodium hydroxide, like 6 normal sodium hydroxide. So let's decant the supernatant, leaving behind the precipitate, because it is the precipitate that we're going to use. So with this precipitate, I'm going to add this with 6 normal sodium hydroxide. Observe what happens. Nakuha? Then to the precipitate of the reaction between the chromic sulfate and the sodium hydroxide, let us add this with the 6 normal sodium hydroxide. Let's add this. Then compare the results. What can you say about the reaction exhibited between the ferric hydroxide and the sodium hydroxide and the chromic hydroxide with the sodium hydroxide? Compare the results. So that is all for the pre-lab lecture. What I would like you to do is you are going to answer all the questions given in the lab guide and write your observations as well as the chemical equation representing all the chemical reactions. Then submit your activity output on Wednesday next week. That would be all for today. This is your teacher, Professor Nesitas Ruiz of Holy Name University.